Let's get started. Okay, so as the first step, you need to install React on your system. And if you have it already installed, then you can skip this part. Otherwise, we're gonna install it from scratch. There are a couple of ways to install React on your system. You can also do it manually if you like, but it's not recommended because it takes a lot of time to do it. So there is an easier way to do that. There is a GitHub project called Create React App. And the advantage of using the Create React app is that it does all the necessary configurations and package installations for you. And once you start the application, the React app will be directly live on your local host and ready for development. And that's why we are going to use this way in this tutorial. To use Create React app, firstly, you need to have Node.js installed on your computer or Yarn. Both of them works, you can choose the way you prefer. I'm going to use Node.js in this tutorial, so if you don't have it yet, just head to the official website of Node.js. I have also put down the necessary links on the description part, and after you head to this website, just click on this button for download Node.js, and after that you can install it on your system. Make also sure that you have the latest stable version possible, because we are going to use npx for this Create React app installation, and it requires a newer version of Node. After the installation is completed, open your terminal or your Windows command prompt and type node-v to see the version of your node. So as you can see, I have the current version. And you can also check your npm version by typing npm-v. And now we can also see the latest npm version. Now we are ready to use Create React app. I am switching to my workspace, which will be on desktop itself. You should also switch to your workspace first, that's where you would like to keep your React folder. And after it's done, we are going to use this command for the installation. If you are on Mac or Linux, first of all, you need to become a super user with the sudo command, and after that type npx, then create React app, and finally you need to give a name to your React application, my first app. And now the installation has started. This process may take a couple of minutes, so I am skipping this part. Okay, the installation has completed. Now there are just two little steps to follow. Firstly, you need to change the directory to your application so we can start it. And finally, you need to use the npm start command so the application will get live on your local host. So let's see. Okay, so as you can see, now the app is running live on my local host and is ready for development. Okay, so our app is running now on localhost, and I have opened the project on VS Code, and here you see the file structure. Let's explain it shortly. The first folder you see here is Node modules, and once you open it, you'll see that it's a huge file, but the good thing is there isn't anything that we are going to do here. These are all of the external packages that comes together with npm. And if you need to add any external package later with npm, it should be saved here. So that's why it's important to know, but you don't need it for actual coding. And the next file is packagelog.json. And here what you see is, this is also a huge file, and you can find all of these packages which are inside Node modules. You can find all of the necessary information and the names and the versions and other stuff of these external packages. They are all saved under packagelog.json. So once you delete something or add a new package maybe with npm, then you should see them saved under this packagelog.json file. And the next file is package.json. This is much shorter than the other two. Here you can find the information of the name of our app, the version, and the necessary dependencies. For example, the current version of React we see here. So once you need to check what your current version of React is, you can find the information under package.json. Another important thing you can find here is the script names that we use together with npm. For example, npm start, npm build, and the other scripts, when you need to make configurations with scripts, you can do it here. Okay, now let's continue with the actual development folder, which is the source folder. So we are going to do our development under the source folder. And what we currently see here, what is live under localhost, is the app.js file. So let's open it. Okay, so when you first time see this code here, you might be surprised because it looks like HTML code is being returned by a JavaScript function. So what is this actually? So let's talk about this code here. Here we see that there is a JavaScript function which returns HTML. But this code here is actually a special syntax of React known as JSX, which allows us to write a code very similar to HTML and run it later together with JavaScript. At the beginning, you might have some difficulties to get used to this usage of JSX, but it is actually very simple and very easy to use and also to read. There are just little differences from HTML, which is that, for example, when you need to assign a CSS class, we use the class attribute with HTML, but class does not work with JSX because it refers to JavaScript class. And that's why you should use class name. This is something very important. You have to be careful when you code JSX. And there is also a very nice advantage of using JSX, which is that it allows us to code JavaScript operations or JavaScript logic together with HTML. For example, let's add here a JavaScript logic. The only thing you need to do is use curly braces. And inside the curly braces, you can make any JavaScript operations you want or write any JavaScript logic you want. For example, I'm going to make a mathematical operation here. And normally, once you render this with HTML, you are going to exactly see this code here. But since this is JSX, once I save it, what we see here is that it is 4. So this is also a very nice advantage of JSX. The next important thing to explain is that what this function is actually doing. So it returns JSX code, okay, but what you also see here is that it's actually being exported. So why is that? Because this function is not an actual JavaScript function, but it is a component. So what is a component? So let's go to Twitter. Twitter has a nice user interface and is divided to many sections. And what the component approach does is that it divides the user interface into smaller pieces, into smaller logical pieces, rather than writing all of the code under one single HTML file. So for example, this section here can be a component. The main page that we see the tweets can be another component. And for example, the tweet itself can be another component. This trend section, this search bar, all of them can be independent components if you have built Twitter with React. And additionally, today all of the modern frameworks like Angular or Vue.js also embracing the component-based structure because it is much easier to develop together with components. Another important thing about components is that we write them once, but we can use them again and again with calling the component. So how we can do this is that once we create our component and export it, we need to import the component somewhere in our file structure so it can be visible in the page. So now the question is, where is this app component is being called? We go back to our file structure and you see here a file called index.js. Now let's open it. Now here you see some imported files and packages, but what you see here is that is an object called ReactDOM which renders the app component, this one, and binds it. You can actually ignore this one. And let's fix this, okay? Now what this render function does here is that it binds our app component This is the main component, by the way, with a document ID called root. So where is this root? Let's open the developer tools, and what we see here is that there is really an ID called root, and under this root is running our application. So you can find this root inside an index.html file under the public folder. And the index.html file is the only HTML file we have. This configuration is made at the beginning with create React app, and here what we see is the root ID. But under it there is nothing. There is nothing you see. So I hope now you have a better understanding. This div with root ID is being taken and is being binded together with the app component here, and then it's going to be rendered together, so you can see this page live here. But also you don't have to worry yourself about this thing here. I just would like to explain where is this app actually running, and so you are not going to make any development here. Okay, now let's see how to create our first component. And to do that, there are a couple of ways you need to follow. Firstly, we need to create a new file. So let's say user.js. Okay, now we have created. What you need to be careful about is that the naming convention for components is always that it should start with a capital letter. And also the function itself. So function user. And now we are creating just an ordinary JavaScript function, but to define this as a component, it should always return a JSX code. Okay, now this function is returning a JSX code, and finally we need to export it so we can also use it somewhere else in our project. One more thing to mention here is that in the older versions of React, you had to import React so that it will understand that, okay, this is a React function. But starting with React version 17, we currently have React 17, you don't have to use it anymore. Now we don't see it yet in our page because we haven't called it yet. So let's call this here. And firstly, we need to import our new component. So import user from user. Okay. And now let's call it somewhere here. And to call a functional component, we need to opening a tag, the name of the component, and then we need to close the tag. Save it, and now it has appeared here, so we can see that this JSX code is now called under the app functional component. Now this is a good example of a functional component. There is another definition that you can use. You don't have to use the function key, right, if you like. Instead, you can use the arrow function definition, like this one. And this is also acceptable in React. So if you like, you can also use the arrow function definition for functional components. And one last thing to mention about components is that if you are working in an older React project, you may also see that there are JavaScript classes as components. But now we don't want to use class components anymore because they are slowing the application and it's harder to maintain. The reason that before we had class components in our React code is because of the state management, which is something I will explain in my next video. The only way when you need to use states was possible with class components, but now this has also changed. So now we can also use states in functional components and we don't need to use class components anymore. Okay, now this video is getting a bit longer, so before closing, there is one last thing I would like to mention, which is also important for beginners to know, is that about React props. So let's explain shortly what props is. As I mentioned before, you create a component once, but you can use it many times as you need. Now if I call this 4 times, we always see that the same text is getting rendered, but we can do this more dynamic by using props. So let's change this a little bit. By the way, our code, our JSX code, should always be wrapped by a parent div or a parent tag, it is not possible to return like 2 or 3 elements. It's not going to work. So be careful that your code should always be wrapped inside a div or something like that. But sometimes these divs may be unnecessary. So you can just return an empty tag, and this is also working in React. This is also something important to mention. Okay, now let's change this a little bit. Our user component will have a username. Let's make it an h2 tag, and here we will see the username of our user and also a message like hello world. Let's save it. Since this is a hard-coded text, it always returns the same value again and again, but we can make this more dynamic by using props. So let's see what is props. So we can use this more dynamic by passing data directly here. Now React has a special object called props, which allows us to pass data from the parent component to the child components. Unfortunately, it's not possible to pass data from one component to another at the same level, or from child to parent. It's not working with props. There are other ways, or in React you can do this, but not with props. With props, you can only pass data in a one-directional way, only from top to down, from parent to child. This is also very important that you need to be careful about. So let's define our attributes here. One username and a message, or let's make this a tweet. What a nice day. Okay, now we have defined our props here, and they also contain a data. Now I don't want you to memorize it, so let's log the props object to the console and let's see what it gets returned. To do that, first of all we need to pass the props object here as a parameter, and now we can log it to the console. And we can see that this props returns 4 objects. The other ones are empty because we haven't defined here anything yet, so they are empty. But the first one, as we can see, has its username and tweet attributes and their values. So this is how we can pass data with props. And we can also make it dynamic. Okay, now let's save this and let's close this. Now we still see the hard text here. Now let's change this dynamically. The only thing we need to do is to create our curly braces, and inside we are defining props dot, and so we can access its attributes, user name, and the same thing for the second attribute, props dot tweet. Save it. Okay, now as we can see, our component is more dynamic. So this is the usage of props. And one more thing, we can use object destructuring. If you want to get rid of the props keyword, we can destructure our object. So this is the object destructuring. I also have another video about this if you don't know how to use it. So we can get rid of this props keyword. Save it. And now it looks nicer. So this is how we can use props in React. Now props is read-only, and we can only pass this, but we cannot really change the data with props. React has another special method to do that, which is called state, but states are a little bit complicated, and I'm gonna explain state in the next video. So guys, I hope you find this video helpful.